Hi there, welcome to the second video for Texture Paint Champ. In this video we're going to cover the painting process. So we've already set up our target textures and our paint textures and correctly mapped them. So we're ready to get started. To start painting, we simply press play in the editor. For the sake of this demo, I'm going to press play in a new editor window so we can see it full screen. We can see that we've now been given a new UI that allows us to change many of the brush settings and material settings. We can also see some additional lighting options and the ability to save our textures out when we're done. We are able to toggle between UI mode, where we can change the settings, and paint mode, where we can paint our mesh by pressing the right mouse button. This can be configured to a different button in the preferences, which we'll cover later. When entering paint mode, we can move our camera around with the mouse. We can also move around with the WASD keys. If we want to change the speed of our camera movement, we can do so by pressing the plus or minus keys. We paint using the left mouse button. We can see in our paint panel that we have both a paint mode and an erase mode. This should be quite obvious, but when we click paint, it will paint the paint texture over the target texture. If we click erase, it will erase the paint texture and restore the target texture. As Texture Paint Champ doesn't come with an undo function, this is how we can clean up any mistakes. We can also toggle between paint and erase by pressing the left shift key. By default, when we paint, we stamp. That means when we click the left mouse button, it simply does a single stamp of the texture. If we change this to stroke and hold the left mouse button down, we can actually stroke our paint texture over our target texture. We can change the brush we're using by clicking on the preview icon in the top right of the panel. Texture Paint Champ comes with 30 brushes built in, but we'll cover in a later video how to create your own custom brushes. To select a new brush, simply click on the new icon. You'll see it then reflected in the preview icon as well as in the preview over the static mesh itself. We are able to add a tint to the albedo texture by clicking the tint button. This will give us a color palette which will allow us to make changes to the albedo. But we can see here that it shows us a preview over the entire mesh. This is because we have preview changes switched on in our brush settings. If we turn preview changes off, we will see that the color changes will only appear in the icon preview up here. We'll leave it on. Once we've found a color tint we like, so we can access it later, we can click the plus button. This will save it to the palette. This will only keep it here for this session. If we want this here, even after we restart the editor, we can click the save button, and we will get confirmation in the debug that this has been successfully saved. If we want to delete a color from our saved palette, we can simply select the trash bin icon, select the color, and it will disappear. We have to either accept or cancel the new color before we can continue. We can change the strength of our brush by adjusting the opacity settings. We can do this either using the slider or by typing in a number directly into the corresponding field. We can also change the brush size. Lastly, we can rotate our brush. All three of these settings also come with shortcuts. The brush size can be controlled by using the mouse wheel. If holding R while using the mouse wheel, we can change the rotation. If holding F while using the mouse wheel, we can change the opacity or fade. We would probably want to rotate our brush after every time we paint to get a more natural look. We can do this automatically by selecting Random Rotate. We can see that the preview on our mesh uses the albedo texture. It doesn't use the other textures like normal, roughness, and anything else in our texture set for performance reasons, as we just want a proxy of where the brush is likely to paint. If we prefer, instead of using the albedo, we can use a color. And we can see a different color for erase as we do for paint. These colors can be set in the preferences, which we'll cover later. We can change the rotation and tile size and position of our overall paint material or set of textures. By leaving preview changes on, we'll be able to see how this looks across the entire mesh. We can also change the strength of any of our individual paint textures. In this example, I have a normal texture, an art texture that's just using the green channel, so I know that's roughness texture, an albedo texture and a metalness texture. If I select the art texture and change the strength down to around about 0.2, we can see this will paint on a wetter look of our grass. This doesn't change the underlying texture or material. This just changes how the brush will paint. So if we were to change our strength back to 1, we can actually paint over the wet look in some places, but retain the wet look in others. This allows us to combine multiple variations of different brush strengths. To paint using a height map, we first have to declare the height map in the settings. Once we've done that, we'll be able to use the height map toggle. Here we can change the strength of the height map, the contrast, and choose whether to blend the underlying normal of the target material with the paint normal. We can see when it's set to 0, the grass, if we look over in this section, the grass doesn't pick up any of the brick normal. When we bring this up to 1, it picks up a lot of the brick normal. In this example, I may want to lighten my albedo as the grass looks too dark. When I'm happy with how the height map is being applied, I can simply then just paint. I can still erase, but if I make changes to my height map, I can actually repaint over the top, and those changes will be picked up. I can also invert my height map. In this case, my height map is inverted by default. This means the darker areas, which are in between the bricks, will be painted as a priority. If I turn inversion off, we can see it will do the opposite. As I may have made a lot of changes to my brush and material settings, I may want to save them for later. I can do this by clicking the Save button, and I'll get confirmation at the top that they've been saved. This means when I come back into a session, either a brand new session or even after restarting the editor, I can click the Load button and retrieve the settings that I'd previously saved. In the top right hand corner, we have a few buttons that allow us to view our mesh slightly different with different lighting conditions. First off, we're able to remove the floor. This can change the lighting slightly, but also give a darker background. Also, if we're using a mesh that may have physics and you may need to paint the bottom of the mesh, it's not going to work very well in the current settings of this scene. Therefore, we can put some underlighting on that will allow us to paint it without needing to rotate the object. Lastly, the lighting in this scene may not match the lighting that this mesh will ultimately be placed in. So we can look at this mesh under different lighting conditions. We can either do this by toggling through the light bulb button up here, or we can press the numbers 1 to 7 on our keyboard to see the various lighting conditions. Once we've finished painting, we can save our textures. We can do this by clicking the button in the top right corner. We will then see a prompt. The save destination is where we want our textures saved. The default option here can be set in the preferences. We can change it, but we do need to make sure we spell it correctly. It will warn us if we enter an invalid file path. We can also choose to save our new textures in the original folder of the target textures. We may not have painted over all of the target textures, but to keep our texture sets together, we can include all textures, including those that we haven't painted. We can also save a new material instance with our textures for convenience. The names of our textures will be the original target texture file names, but we can use the parameter names if we prefer. We can also add a prefix or a suffix to the file names. In this example, I'm going to keep the save destination as Texture Paint Champ Save Textures, which is my default. I'm going to include the unpainted textures so I have all my texture sets together, and I want a new material instance. I will leave my suffix as _1 so I have a unique file name. And I'm going to use the parameter names as they're shorter and I prefer them. Now I can click Save, and my textures and new material instance will be saved out to the folder that I stated. The first time you do this, you'll get a warning and you'll need to click Accept or OK in the bottom right hand corner. You can tick the checkbox that says to not be informed in the future, just like I've done, so I didn't have to confirm this time around. We can see that the new material instance and the textures have now been saved to the folder. However, the material instance is still referencing the original textures. If I put my new material instance on the object, it doesn't change. Let's open it up. We can see these aren't the new textures I've painted, as it just took a copy of the material instance, so we're going to need to drag our new textures on. Now when I save it and go back to my scene, I can see that my new textures are being applied. Let's take a look at Texture Paint Champ preferences that we can set. These can be found on the TPC master item underneath the texture mapping section. The initial brush preview is whether we want paint mode to start with albedo texture or a specified color. We can change this while in play mode, but this is just how we like it to start when we first enter play mode. When using a specified color, we can actually change what these colors are for both paint and for erase. Our brush preview by default updates every frame. This gives us a nice smooth movement as we're looking to paint our object. If you have performance issues, you can change this so it doesn't update every frame. For example, 0.1 will update 10 times a second. This will give better performance but create a slightly more jittered movement of your preview. When we save our custom textures that we've painted, they will adopt the size of the original target textures that they've painted over. However, we can declare a size for all of our textures instead by setting a custom size. In this case, this will make all textures 2K regardless of what the original textures were. Load brush preferences on play will just automatically load any saved preferences the minute we enter play mode. Of course, we can load them manually by pressing the load button anyway. The default for toggling between the UI mode and the painting mode is the right mouse button. If this feels unnatural, you can change this to the left shift button or the tab button. The default for toggling between paint and erase is left shift, but you can also change this to either right mouse button or tab button if you prefer. The mouse wheel is used as a shortcut for brush size, opacity, and rotation. You can change its speed here. While camera speed can be changed in play mode by pressing the plus and minus keys, you can choose the default camera speed when you first enter play mode here. You can change your default save destination here. You'll of course have the option to change this when you press save textures, but this would just be what comes up at first. You can also do the same for the prefix or suffix for your file names.